Well, here we go again. President Trump just announced that he's calling off tonight's scheduled bombing of Iran. If you're keeping count at home, that's literally the fifth time he's done it so far during this war. He posted on Truth Social that discussions with Iran were going so well and they're at the highest levels of Iranian leadership that he's going to call off the strikes, and he reassures us that peace is just about to break out. The Iranians are finally coming to heel. Now, I collected the most extraordinary data set. This sounded sort of familiar, so I went looking for how many times in the past President Trump has told us we're on the cusp of a deal, and it's a pretty extraordinary list. In fact, 2 weeks before the war started, he said Iran wants to make a deal very badly. Then, of course, he started the war, and each and every day, not every day, he's taken a couple of days off, but every few days he's come out once again and told us we're on the cusp of ending the war. In fact, at this point, I counted 50 separate occasions over roughly 25 days, separate days, in which he's told us we're on the cusp of a war. In March, he said we have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Mate, if that's true, what's taken so long? In April, he said it should be days, not weeks. Well, it wasn't days. In May, he said we're getting close to making a deal. Well, sunshine, it's quite a bit later right now. Later in May, the end of May, he said the US is close to a deal. Well, we're almost halfway through June now. And a couple of days ago, he said we are very close to a final deal with Iran. In fact, if you collect all of the quotes, it's several pages of the president day after day, time after time, reminding us that we're on the cusp of victory. I want to juxtapose that with something else. What we saw today was actually a pattern we've seen throughout this war, which is any time the president de-escalates, the American stock market goes up. And if you think about that, people are buying and selling stocks based on a bet about the future profitability of large American companies. And so if you see the price of stocks go up when we de-escalate, that's markets saying that they believe that the future profitability of American firms will be higher if we don't escalate the war. And the flip side, by the way, is also true, which is every time the president has escalated, American stocks have fallen quite substantially. It's what led me to suggest that markets are reacting as if they believe that the Iran war will take $1 trillion, possibly $3 trillion off the value of American equities, which is a huge, huge effect. Now, today what happened was the president announced for the 50th time, literally the 50th time, that we're on the cusp of ending the war, and American stocks rose by 1%. A natural question that I get from some people is, why do markets keep getting suckered by this? And I think I want to give you a different lens for thinking about this. Maybe it's not that markets are being suckered. In fact, that markets understand that the president only occasionally tells the truth. That then means that when the president speaks, there's a good chance it's noise rather than signal, that it's nonsense rather than something to respond to. When you speak this way, of course, that provides an incentive for markets to respond less. If there's only a 1/10 chance that what you say is going to be true, then the market should only respond 1/10 as vigorously as it otherwise would. Now, if you think about that, the consequences actually are terrifying. So a known liar says something that could be good news or could be a lie, and markets rise enormously. The only way that that makes sense is if it turns out to be the truth, it's very, very valuable for American corporations. And so that markets respond as much as rising 1% based on a statement from a known liar is another way of saying markets are behaving as if they believe, if they were told for sure the war was going to end soon, that American stocks would be worth a whole lot more. So I think the right way to think about this is, in fact, that markets once again are doubling down on the idea that this war is very economically expensive for the United States. And I've talked before, the question here is not how much are the bombs going to cost. The question is, What sort of crater will this war leave in the global economy? What sort of ongoing damage? How long will the Strait of Hormuz remain closed? How will Iran use its leverage that it now knows that it has over the Strait? How much will this affect future US defense spending? How much will this change our role in the world? How much will this affect our ability to cooperate with others around the world and reshape future economic opportunities? And the stock market, and again, I'm not saying the stock market is the economy, but the stock market is responding as if this is an intensely important moment for the US economy, that the number one story that matters for the US economy is what happens in Iran. Anyway, I find that sort of interesting. We're also going to see over the next few hours foreign markets respond probably even more. And that's because this is a war that doesn't just rewire America's place in the world, but actually has even bigger effects on other countries. And that's because the US is largely oil independent, other countries much less so. And so the suffering that we're seeing in the United States is not quite as bad as we see in other countries. And then I want to give you one final note that worries me a lot. We've actually seen versions of this two-step before. The president moves forward on some policy that he believes deeply in, not based on analysis, but his gut. And then American stocks tank. And then what he does is he walks it back. We saw this happen a lot during the tariff wars. Look, here's the thing I worry about. That's a reasonable feedback loop some of the time, but if you're a known liar, then that then means that markets are not going to believe anything that what you say. That in turn means that markets are going to moderate how much they respond after you say something. And that in turn means that you could say something wildly foolish and markets might think, yeah, he's probably going to walk that back. He probably didn't mean that. If he probably didn't mean it, if half of what he says is garbage, then we don't need to respond. And if we don't respond, that breaks that feedback loop from the president to Wall Street and from Wall Street to the president. That's that problem that the president is a liar, not a reliable source of truth, which causes markets to under-respond. That's separate from a related issue, which is if the president responds to the market and the market understands that the president responds to the market, then, this is something people worried a lot about during the trade wars, then if the president does something stupid, the market understands that if the market falls, he'll undo the stupid thing, given that the market doesn't need to fall. If the market doesn't fall, then that feedback loop is broken and the president persists with the stupid thing. Look, let me step back. There's actually two really big points that I wanted to make here. The first is in an information environment in which the president has moved from taking communication with the American people and with investors seriously to lying in an ongoing and repeated way, that fundamentally changes how we should think about any form of communication. The extent to which the president has repeated lies this time would be funny if we weren't talking about something so serious. And the second thing is, once you take that into account and you still see markets responding, then you should understand that's markets really saying, hey, look out. We think this is really, really dangerous, so dangerous that we respond to it even if we understand there's a pretty good chance the president's lying.